And with student athletes, I have found that if you can show them something in their performance that changes when they sleep more, that they're more apt to change. So I actually had one of my assistants here remind me, he was an intern for me when I was at Kentucky, and he reminded me of when we were at Kentucky, we started looking at game performance grades. This is just a quick anecdote. So this one of the, it was a linebacker, starting linebacker. He was getting scoring like 72%. That was his game grade. So I pulled him aside and I said, hey, listen, he was wearing a fatigue science band. There you go, Jeff. And I just said, hey, listen, you're sleeping 5 hours a night. I said, first of all, like, is 72% a passing grade for football? I mean, let's be real. Like, you're here to play football, right? And he goes, yeah. I said, is 72% what you consider winning football? He said, no. I said, well, one thing I can see here is you're not sleeping enough. How do you think that may affect your ability to go to practice? He goes, yeah, I'm always tired. I said, well, let's try to move the needle on that. And it was next week, it was like he got 6.5 hours of sleep and he went up to almost 80%. And he went up to 7. And it was like this linear relationship. And he ended up finishing in like 90 percentile grades later in the season. He was sleeping almost 8 hours a night. He came back and he's like, Coach, I mean, for me, that was it. I just was unable to go to practice and pay attention. And then I showed up at the games and I was tired. And so, and it's something that they can control and they can own. And so I think that people are starting to wise up to it. It's easily accessible on your phone, whether it's accurate or not. It may be inaccurately consistent, but it's something you can measure on your iPhone or those watches. But I think it's turning to the tide to stuff like putting the onus on the athletes. Like, look, it's on you, and this is something that you can control. And so I don't think everybody's throwing their hands up. I think it's they're starting to go in the other direction.
With the military, it's kind of actually, I do this the same with athletics and with military. It's about, can you go into these dynamic, unpredictable environments with very little sleep debt? Those who go into, whether it's schedule change for sports, right, or bouncing between time zones, or whether it's these, deployment types of scenarios, the people that go into these types of situations with minimal to no sleep debt handle those times better. Those who go into those situations with a lot of sleep debt, a lot of residual fatigue, it tends to crush them. So it's about acknowledging that there are times when you're not going to sleep well. There are times when you're going to get poor sleep. There are times when you're going to get no sleep. But if you can, on the front end, if you can handle that with taking care of what you need to do, then you're going to be in a better position down the road.
Yeah. And do you ever liken the sleep piece, like the accumulation of good quality sleep is like, that's your training too. Like you're trying, like, just like you're trying to accumulate aerobic endurance and speed and exposure to all these things. Are you telling them this is part of your training as well?
Absolutely. It all goes back to quantity and quality, right? So quantity is good with sleep, but quality is just as important, right? It's like I can go out and shoot 200 free throws every single day, which sounds great, but if I only make one, really, what does that do for me? So it's really it's a culmination of everything at the end of the day.
Yeah, you can't cram for the sleep exam. So we'll get Jeff to chime in here. Jeff, you're the seller of sleep and the
official title,
the pillow entrepreneur.
I'll take it.
What kind of things do you see out there when you go and you try to, we'll say, convince or sell the product of monitoring fatigue and improving people's quality and duration of sleep? Like, do you get blown off a lot? Do people actually take you seriously? What kind of things are you what kind of things are you encountering?
Yeah, it's interesting because we work. Eric talked a little bit about the collegiate space and Brandon with the military, and so for me, my job is to cover all of those, and then even into the pro side as well in Olympic sports. So we don't really discriminate in terms of who we want to work with. I think mostly comes down to people have done a series of things typically before they're going to engage in a conversation with us. So they'll do some education, they'll bring in a consultant, or maybe it's the strength coach or the trainers that deliver the content to the athletes. Maybe they'll do some wellness surveys around sleep, try to build a bit of a profile. And then typically what happens is, year 2, year 3, they're looking to evolve that for various reasons and try to take a closer look at sleep and recovery. The second piece is the whole operational, like, travel component, which we tend to get involved with a little bit as well. So if teams are crossing time zones, in particular, those bigger, East Coast, West Coast swings are for our international Olympic teams, cross continent travel and whatnot. So just getting some numbers and quantifying this stuff a little bit more, I think, helps ultimately the performance staff have better discussions with, coaches and front office and whatnot. So just to better manage in this area. So I think, in terms of getting blown off, sure. I mean, there's a lot of people that, had the same response to, your example off the top, hey, we can't control if these guys are going to play video games and whatnot. So there's certainly a group of people that have that mindset, right? So I think where people are wanting, like guys like Eric and others that are, wanting to look for a solution or some tools to help educate their student athletes, right? And in our case, the tool happens to be an app and some technology to help hopefully drive some insights around their sleep and what that means from a performance standpoint. So, I think just in terms of, like, as a global, in terms of the market, I think we're starting to see, this isn't something new. I think Eric, probably used Ready Bands 5-6 years ago in a research capacity. So, this has been going on for a while. I think it's just teams will engage when the time is right and when they're ready to take that next step, so to speak.
Well, the interesting thing is, I know that you've been a proponent of getting, like, a GM or an athletic director or a head coach to actually wear the band to monitor their own sleep so that they can actually speak intelligently or even just be part of that experience. Eric, have you tried that with any other people other than athletes, coaches, and have you had success with that?
Yeah, we at my previous club that I was with, the owner and the general manager and the head coach all wore it at different times. And I think it was eye-opening for them. And at the current institution I'm at William & Mary, I tried to give it to a coach. He knew it was bad and he just didn't want to know. But, for the most part, I think people are inquisitive. They want to know, like, am I really getting enough sleep? And executives especially, you start seeing these performance or performance coaches or coaches for executives now. One of the first things they're tackling is sleep. And so when I was at the Texans, all the people in senior leadership really wanted to see what was going on with that, because they're having to make critical decisions. And we want high-performing coaches just as much as we want high-performing athletes, because they're the ones that are having to pull the trigger, so to speak, in the most critical situations. If they're sleep-deprived and they can't think clearly, well, they may make a poor decision. So I've found that executives and coaches are open because they know it's a problem. And if you can show somebody something that's objective, and it's an objective measure. And I really like Jeff's solution, because then you have I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but you get to see basically a score that shows, like, how your reaction time would suffer if your sleep was poor. And you show that to an athlete, and it's valid research. They go, wow, I'm giving up to 15 to 18% of my reaction time. And then you start going down. I just did a talk for all of our freshmen. We had a freshman academy, and it was really interesting just to see their reaction to just some of the things. Like, hey, listen, if you're up for 18 to 24 hours, it's like showing up legally drunk to your test. So you might as well just walk in with a 6-pack and set it on your chair with your Scantron, and you're ready to go. And that was really interesting to them. It's like, wow, like, maybe I should, because they, we're getting exam time, and they're like, well, maybe I should go to bed instead of pulling an all-nighter. So
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
Brandon, same for you. Was that something that you used in your approach when dealing with sleep, is going to the leadership and saying, okay, this is something that I want you to try as well. And maybe that would help you on a performance level, not just the people in the field or the athletes on the team. What is your, and even the corporate example? I know you've done a lot of work with corporate entities as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You need both because, well, one, you need the buy-in, right? And the worst thing you can ever have, and this has happened, right? We've all seen it happen, is the coach gives you 1 hour, sleep's important, and he has an hour scheduled for you. And then all of a sudden it whittles down to 30 minutes because something else came up, right? They had to spend a little more time on the court or the floor or the cages, right? Now sleep's still important, but now you have 30 minutes, right? And then after you finish your talk, they come out and said, all right, that stupid sleep talk just chewed up 30 minutes of my time. So now everybody's like, well, forget it. It's clearly sleep's not important. So it's a top-down, bottom-up approach as well, for sure. But it's interesting. It's just a lot of times people don't even know what to do with that information. Case in point, when I was at Stanford, I went and asked for a sleep coach in 2007. And what I got back from the administration was, who else is doing this?
Yeah.
I said, well, nobody. Okay, well then, but if we did it, would we be the best? Yeah. Okay, well, let's hold off then. Right? And that's what happens. It's one of these things where until it becomes other people starting to do it, then all of a sudden people start to look and then see some success there. So, many times then these coaches are on board because they hear from another coach of theirs or a colleague of theirs or an athletic director of theirs or a fellow GM or assistant GM. Then they all want to try it and go from there. So yeah, it's important.
Wow. And here I was thinking Stanford was the center of the innovation universe.
Well, you have to remember the athletic department and the academic side, they only share a name, right? And that's something to remember. It's just that, everybody in this knows how sports runs. Right? It's like They only think a year ahead, wins and losses, maybe 4 years in college. They get nervous about changing, especially when you win a lot of second place trophies. Then it's like, well, we don't really want to deviate too much because we're really close.
If you are mouth breathing when you're sleeping at night, then that's going to be an issue. Your body can't get good quality sleep and oxygen intake to the rest of the system. That's going to totally affect the way that your body works and functions. The ability to be able to recover from an athletic perspective is going to totally be compromised if your body's, again, not taking things in. I have people tape their mouths shut if they know that they're mouth breathers. Do all types of things to try and help manage that aspect from a pain component. I have one client, this is a true story. She did half of the stuff on her own, but she wears earplugs, she wears nasal expanders, she has tape on her mouth, and she's got eye patches on her. I said, I'm just dying to know what your husband thinks going to bed at night, what that looks like,
it works better than the I have a headache excuse.
Exactly. But when I'm looking at someone, I'm assessing them, I literally look at nasal passages and I say, okay, take a breath in. And if I see that their nasals close off, then the likelihood of them getting good nasal, which is where you get the nitric oxide component, which is a really integral part of your body getting good oxygenation and good balance to the system, then I know it's compromised at nighttime. So it's a big part of what I do. And then I try to identify the right, a dentist that specializes in sleep apnea or TMD components, or send them to an EMT if I know that they've had chronic, nasal fractures or concussions and stuff like that may have a sinus that's, knocked way out of whack. And then it's just trying to get that, to everybody else's point, it's getting the buy-in from them to say, oh, this maybe could be an important component about feeding into some of my symptoms.
No, I agree. Ryan Banta, would you agree with what you're seeing with high school kids and what you're dealing with fatigue and how it carries over into their sports?
Well, yes. The simple answer is yes. And it's funny because it's kind of a bell curve in regards to your most elite students are having trouble sleeping because they don't know how to dial back the work. They don't understand that, like, maybe that 1 extra % to get to the H, and their overall health or for another class may not be worth it. I've got horror stories where back in the day we used to be a little bit more allowed to be on social media, and then thankfully to myself, kind of self-policing, like, I probably don't need to know that kid's still up at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever when I get up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and these are the things that they're up studying and they're doing this, and we have to work through that conversation of, hey, I know that you're struggling with this one particular piece of homework. Maybe it would be better to go to bed early and get up early and then go in and make an appointment with that teacher ahead of time or a friend before school and discuss it with someone who can actually help you, as opposed to there's no one you can really socially communicate at that point appropriately to help you through that work. It's better just to go to bed. But then on the flip side, you've got the Fortnite folks who are up till, all hours in the evening playing that video game, which, by the way, one of my best friends, Kevin Lanning, is the director of artwork for that game. So I tell him all the time, I said, you're making my job real difficult. But, so you've got those ends where you've got the kid who just doesn't care at all and has no clue about what's going on. And you have the other kid who's staying up because they're trying to be very rigorous in their homework and trying to check off all the boxes. So what we try to do in our program is we'll have our once a week long team huddles, and we'll take them into a classroom setting, and they know that that's what we're going to discuss. And, I like the term sleep hygiene a lot, so we use that one. And it's amazing how many of these kids don't realize these simple techniques that they need to have to go to sleep. Simple things like, hey, did you know you have a blue light on your filter on your phone? And they're like, no. I go, turn that thing on for me, please. Did you know that, if you have your room a little bit cooler, or if you have a fan on, or you have the window open to get the temperature regulated for your room, if your parents like the house really hot or whatever, these are things you can do to help yourself sleep. And they just have no clue about that. They have no clue about caffeine. I mean, these kids are drinking, everything from Red Bull, Monster Energy drink, and Starbucks to keep themselves wired all day long. And they don't realize the half-life of caffeine and how long it takes for that to get out of your system and how it periodically disrupts your sleep. And so it's really, really interesting. And then if you have sleep apnea, if you're a kid who has that, who's going to know you have that unless you have a brother and sister in your room? There's no one coming in and really checking in on you when your parents are sleeping, you're asleep. Probably sometimes that doesn't happen until you have a spouse or a significant other. It took me a long time to realize why nobody really liked to be in the same room as me until my wife is like, you snore like crazy, you roll around like crazy, and all these things that I had that were disrupted sleep. And thank God for her, because she helped me work through some of those things, and I'm a much better sleeper now than I used to be. But kids don't have that sometimes unless they have a brother and sister who are just like, man, my family member is terrible. So those are simple things that sometimes they're not even aware of. And I think that we have to kind of help them through, especially because society is working towards a 24-hour cycle of communicate with teachers and everybody at all times and all days. We have a private school out here that demands that the kids get the teacher's cell phone number. Well, that's certainly unhealthy when you're in an honors elite private school where somebody's trying to get a hold of their teacher at all times. And then the thing that our school districts have done, I know I'm going on here and I apologize because this is a really big issue, but they keep moving back the start times of schools. They're like, well, kids need more sleep, so let's start the school day later. Well, you all know what's going to happen is that the kids stay up later. And so now you're teaching them worse and worse habits as opposed to addressing the key issue, which is kids don't respect sleep hygiene.
How we'll get you to answer this as well. How has technology helped your message and also get people to check their hygiene, Brandon? And then we'll get Jeff to talk a bit about that.
Technology has helped immensely, but it's a double-edged sword, right? You have that athlete who will do everything and anything, and sometimes that technology can freak them out too, right? So not everybody needs to have it. But from a technology standpoint, overall, it's been phenomenal to try and to have something now which can tell me quality, quantity, consistency, have an effectiveness score like the Ready Band and Fatigue Science has, and those types of things, because it's too important. We've been relying on surveys for so long, and surveys, we know human beings inherently underreport their sleep, right? And they don't have a good sense of their quality of sleep either. The research is clear on that. And furthermore, if somebody is sleep deprived, they're not in a good position to even answer a survey, right? So it's great that surveys are there to get people to think about these items that you want them to think about. But on the other side, you just have to understand that you just can't make really actionable decisions off of them. because technology is going to give you a much better insight to what's happening there.
You know, all these other consumer products are, you know, helping the discussion or getting people to think about their sleep, then maybe that's not a bad thing. I personally, you know, my wife, you know, her friends, they like to count their steps, and the fact that measures their sleep, they, you know, it has them thinking about it. So I think just in terms of where, from my role with the company, we service the strength coaches, the medical staff is my end user. So not so much the consumer. So for these folks, they need some visibility around how their athletes are managing in this area, right? So we want to provide a couple things. We want to provide some interesting insights for the strength coaches, the medical staff, but we also need to do a good job of engaging the end user and having them look at the app and want to continue to wear the product, right? So in terms of sort of our position in the market, we feel like we do a pretty good job of servicing that strength coach, or again, that performance staff or medical staff, because they have some real-time kind of visibility to all of their athletes, whether you have, you know, 10 players on a basketball team or, you know, 125 on your football team. We try to make it really simple for the strength coaches. So I think you know, just at the end of the day, I think people are doing a really good job, and for programs like this where strength coaches and trainers have a good idea of hygiene and they can speak to their athletes on the basics. It's now about sort of taking it to that next level, giving them maybe some tools, some technology. And then also like Michael Mullen said around, you know, there's a lot of stories that we can share here, and people on this call that can talk about real medical issues, you know, from a screening standpoint, right? So just having a basic sort of sleep profile or fatigue profile on your athletes. You know, we do, you know, FMS screening and VO2, you know, there's all these baseline profiles we build in the training camp setting. Well, why not get a 2-3 week baseline on how our athletes sleep? And if there are some guys that are coming back with sort of red flags in the software, or they're self-reporting having, you know, some issues or biting through, you know, night guards and all that, well, maybe we can kick those guys over to the medical side or take that deeper dive, right? So
there's some apps that I've directed people to kind of monitor, like Sleep Cycle, and some other ones that, you know, aren't don't cost much to at least get them opened up to the ideas of it. And if people have Fitbitches, those are the best. I mean, I really highly recommend them.
Oh,
various Fitbits, some of the other ones that are out there, then you know, certainly I like to
I'll have to say that Michael Mullen has the worst potty mouth of anyone I know. Having worked a
that one's
workshop
got to
with him.
go on the shorts on there. That's got to go on.
It's got to go on there. Yeah, I think that's another one on the whiteboard there, Derek. Right?
Yeah. Check.
Check. But in all honesty, one of the things too is that I've had a couple people come back and they've actually kind of gotten a little bit discouraged because they keep trying to, you know, beat the meter. They're trying to like say, man, I'm feeling like I'm getting a little frustrated. I'm trying to do all these good things and put everything into place, and, you know, my numbers aren't really changing. And that's a good opportunity there to be able to say, hey, well, here's some of the stuff we talked about. And unfortunately, it's probably going to mean that you're going to have to visit an ENT or a sleep specialist, or, you know, if they're telling me that they've had a recommendation from a physician about having a sleep study, then go get a sleep study. Just find out how many episodes you're going through. I mean, I go through breath training. I mean, Brandon, I know you're a massive proponent of this as well too, with your breath work stuff. And that's a massive element of what I go on with people, is teaching them learn how to be able to do that. I do recommend nasal cones for people who do have really narrow nasal passages, and it really makes a big difference for a lot of them, just to be able to open that area up, to be able to get better airflow into that area so they don't feel quite so limited. But I think,
hey, Michael, do those breathe right strips do anything?
Yeah, from what I've read, and somebody could feel free to pipe in, the research is fairly mixed. You know, I think that anything that allows someone to feel like if they take a breath in through their nose, it's easier, and they can do it without having to move their head and their neck to be able to take that inhalation, is worthwhile. You know, it's a different animal to kind of say, oh yeah, I want to take these little cones and put them up your nose, and you got this little ring that's hanging up underneath to be able to kind of sell that. But when they put it on once and they try it and they realize like, oh my gosh, I had no idea what was like that. I'll have them do this on their own where they take their fingers and they actually pull like this up and away and say, take a breath in. And if you see their eyes like light up, then that's a good indicator to them. They're like, I had no idea that was supposed to feel like when I breathe in through my nose. So, that's a little test that tells them, hey, you know what? Maybe if we did something that allowed that to open up a little bit better, maybe that would help. And that's like an Amazon stop along the way to getting them to be able to potentially see a professional that might be able to do something that much more.
Yeah, as far as subjective sleep, I mean, we do it right now with our basketball players. They actually do both, but it's interesting because they'll a really easy. Did you wake up feeling rested? That's a really good one. If you wake up feeling rested and ready to go, I mean, that's a good marker that you're okay. If you're waking up and you're honest with yourself and you're not feeling very good, you're not feeling rested, then we need to look into something. Just writing down their sleep quantity, how many hours they think they got, and quality, and then you can kind of just assume that they're off about an hour. That's 45 minutes to an hour is typical in the research when you look at objective or subjective. And then as far as what was the first question you wanted me to answer?
Oh, again, commenting on this whole connection, like, is it affecting injury outcomes or injury potential, I guess? And
you can make the argument. I mean, I'm hopefully going to publish this lit review I did for my PhD, but if you look at the literature and you look at all the different peripheral things that it affects, the central nervous system, the brain, exercise performance, ability to withstand intense physical and psychological stress, all those things, if you start compromising all of those things, then you would think there's going to be a breakdown. It'd be like saying, well, I'm just going to let my oil go for a while and the brake fluid to go for a while. We know X leads to this and X leads to that, but we don't really know. If you just start looking at all the peripheral things, it just adds up. So yeah, to me, it's like if somebody's compromised, you've ever been on a football field or an open field sport where somebody falls and you can sense it and you moved your leg right at the moment that they fell? You know what I'm talking about? But if you're a little bit fatigued and a little bit compromised and you're a little bit delayed in the response, guess what happens? You may get hurt. So, I just show the peripheral pieces. I do know the article that Ryan's talking about, though, with young athletes. That's a very powerful article about injury.
There are studies that show that lack of sleep or sleep deprivation kind of lowers the pain threshold. So that's something that I'll use with some of these people to just kind of sell them on the idea and give them a little bit of hard data, whatever that. Anyways, evidence about that, about the fact that sleep is important. And there are a lot of studies that also look at, so there are the ones that were mentioned previously that I'm familiar with, and there are also the studies that show the increased likelihood of injury with during exam periods or those type of moments for student athletes. So it's clearly not the only thing that happens during exam periods, but even right now, I'm doing some tracking with a university track team that I work with, and we're seeing changes right now as they're in exams, and then with regards to tightness or achiness or those type of things. And I've also seen some with regards to coordination. So we've also seen it a lot with concussions. So sorry, my thoughts are a little bit dispersed, but with concussions and sleep has a huge role in the recovery of it. So that's kind of how I tend to tie it in.
Can I get you to comment on one thing? Like if I'm wearing this and people are like, oh, what's that? Oh, it's my sleep band. They're like, oh, well, my Fitbit does it too. And it can tell me if I'm in like, I had 20% in REM and then I had 30% in deep sleep. And it, and it told me like I woke up, did this, like how, what do you say to people who are saying that they're getting these great detailed sleep analyses from these consumer items?
Yeah, I think it's tough. The reality is and we've done some work with a company that has sort of an at-home polysomnography sort of reading, so to speak. So you go home, you put lead on your forehead, you have a chest heart rate strap, some other things hooked up to your body, and it's actually validated to do a pretty good job at diagnosing medical issues and proper sleep staging. So in our case, our device doesn't go near that stuff. So we don't make those staging claims. I think just really simply, a lot of people don't believe in collecting heart rate from the wrist. And then to further that, to claim REM stages and slow wave and all that, if you don't have any information from the brain, then you're just really guessing. And sometimes that's the information that leads people down a rabbit hole, in terms of, well, I'm really focusing on my REM sleep today. And, when really, if we just can get a better handle on the timing and consistency and the quality metrics, maybe that's enough for the athlete or that person to start to work on some strategy. So I think that's a tough one when people get really granular with a metric on something that probably needs a little bit more validation and whatnot. So I've heard Brandon chime in on this one. I think as a part of a job he had years ago was to evaluate these things and to say, we don't make any claims outside what our validation says, right? And if we can't detect sleep stages, then we're not going to try to guess at that. We're going to offer what we know we can measure from a wrist worn device and whatnot. So